What's up, y'all? InsideCarolina.com. I'm Joey Powell for the Coast to Coast podcast. It's an emergency edition of the show, so you know we got news to break. And Sherrell, McMillan, and Sean Moran have joined me like usual. We're brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt. News to break, and the news is this: Jarin Stevenson coming home to North Carolina. All of the Thomas Wolfe quotes you want to get out there, man, do it. Jarin Stevenson, yes, that Jarin Stevenson. You may recognize the name. North Carolina fans saw him probably play a local kid 2 years at Pittsburgh. He played, nearby at a nearby high school. A lot of folks assumed he was going to be a commit to Hubert Davis and the Tar Heels, and it just didn't turn out that way. He ended up playing in Alabama for 2 seasons, and now has entered the transfer portal and has given his commitment to Hubert Davis and is coming to Chapel Hill after all. Sherrell, this is one of the weird ones. I think most of these commitments that we've done shows for happen really quickly, at least as far as the public understanding of them. And you've been right out in front with the reporting on this the whole time. It seemed like it was pretty quick from when Jarin Stevenson entered the portal, got on North Carolina's radar, and now has committed to come back and play in Chapel Hill. Give me the haps behind the scenes and how this all went down.
Well, I think when you have good relationships with agents and good relationships with people within the college basketball industry, then you're typically going to have good information, and that's the case for this with North Carolina. I think they probably understood that he potentially was thinking about getting into the portal. I'm not sure when they got word of that, but I'm sure he was on the recruiting board as someone who they've dealt with a lot. Obviously, his mom went to UNC, played basketball under Sylvia Hatchell back in the day. Been on campus. Who knows? I mean, he holds the record for unofficial visits to UNC, I'm pretty sure. Lives in Chapel Hill. Played with Drake Powell for 2 years at Northwood before going over to Seaforth, both in Pittsburgh. So it's just somebody they're really, really familiar with. And so when that happens and you get that information, there doesn't have to be much of a vetting process because you did it for 3 years in high school. He was the first 2024 recruit Hubert Davis offered, and I think that was in the fall of 2022. So very, very early. Maybe it was the fall of 2021. I think it was the fall of 2021, actually. So Hubert Davis offered him way early because he was just seen as one of those can't miss. He had the Carolina ties and everything. Didn't end up working out mostly because he opted to reclassify, and that kind of took Carolina out of the running the first time. But said all that to say, when you have a pre-existing relationship, you can pull those levers pretty quickly, and I think that's why there was such a short amount of time from him entering the portal to when he's now committing to UNC. And he's a versatile player. Sean's going to talk more about how he plays, but hasn't quite lived up to the promise I think that he had coming out of high school. But if you're going to take a flyer on a player, you want to do it of someone who's tall and someone who has some skill and someone you're familiar with. So I think all of those are the reasons that he's at UNC now. In addition to the allure of kind of playing for your hometown and playing for the school you grew up rooting for and that your mom played for.
Sean, I'll stop short of asking, kind of what maybe didn't work at Alabama. But I'm going to ask you, based on what you've seen from him for 2 years in in college basketball, on a program that's been very successful recently, what do you think he's bringing to Chapel Hill? And we'll leave out any sort of like any non-skill based stuff. Like, help me understand what skill set he's walking into the locker room with.
I think that is the question of what is that exact skill set after 2 years of being at Alabama. When you look at his time at Alabama, the first year he could have still been in high school, and he had that great game against Clemson to really help them get into the Final Four. And then a lot of people assumed he was going to have that freshman to sophomore year jump, which didn't happen. And there was probably reasons for that. Alabama was obviously a deep and talented team, but coming to Chapel Hill in terms of what he's bringing on the floor at 6'10", 6'11", is that ability to play the 4/the 5. Alabama had him at the 3 at times, but that was more a part of their offense. So he's bringing, from a physical perspective, a lot to the table. From a skill perspective, I think the question remains, what will he actually bring? At Alabama, 2/3 of his shots were three-pointers, a lot in the catch-and-shoot variety, where from a season perspective, he only shot 30%. in conference play, he had a higher percentage, but on a smaller quantity. So if you're just going to have him as a stretch big shooting, is that what you really want? Unless he can increase that percentage, from the size, you would expect rebounding and defensive versatility. Rebounding, he didn't give Alabama a lot on an efficiency basis. He does provide that versatility defensively, where he can guard a 4, he can guard up a 5, he could switch on the perimeter to a 3. So he does provide a lot of positional versatility and potential offensively and defensively. But the question is, how will his skill set be utilized? I think is the main one for UNC in next season.
Sherrell, I want to ask you, how do you think he fits in with the roster as we see it today? Because, we've seen Van Allen Lubin become a very, very reliable option in the post, much more than I think we expected when he transferred in. They've now signed Henri Vesar, who gives you that rim protector, that true 5. Caleb Wilson's going to come in with a lot of athleticism and a lot of accolades and the ability to kind of do things on both ends of the floor. So where does a guy like Jarin Stevenson fit within the current roster, and where might he actually be able to shine that he wasn't able to shine in Alabama?
That also is kind of the $1 million question. He's kind of stuck between kind of two worlds in that his body is made to be more of a small ball 5, I think, like Sean said, or just a really tall stretch 4. But I think his mindset and some of the skills he has and desire has allowed him to play some 3 like he did at Alabama. And this may not be what our readers and subscribers want to hear, but I do think Carolina has designs on him playing some 3 and playing the 4 at UNC. Obviously, like you said, they have Caleb Wilson there already. You would think he will come in and have a good chance of solidifying himself as the 4. But the good thing about Stevenson, as Sean said, I think defensively is where he could really make his mark if he digs in and makes that what they call his anchor skill that anchors him to the roster, because he's got the size, he's got the athletic ability to really be a defensive menace. And it is when you start thinking about putting chess pieces together on a board where you have a 7-foot Vesar and a 6'10 Caleb Wilson and potentially a 6'11 Jarin Stevenson on the court at the same time. None of those guys are particularly like flat-footed or slow or anything. So that gives you a lot of ability to do things defensively that maybe other teams just can't, as far as length and making shooters shoot over the top of you, making it tough to drive in the lane. So for me, I think his skill more so be on the defensive end initially than on the offensive end. If he really commits to it and becomes a better rebounder, then I think he can help the team that way, especially in concert with Caleb Wilson. There's just a lot of versatility there, and I think that's what needs to be tapped into initially for him. Now, the offensive stuff, that will have to come. We'll have to see how he plays in Hubert Davis' system. Obviously, Nate Oates wants you to shoot a ton of threes. That's kind of his game, threes and ducks. And he had the opportunity to do that at Alabama, but he only shot at, both years was like 31%, like Sean said. So I think offensively, maybe try to diversify a little bit, maybe try to get closer to the rim, try to be an energy guy who runs the court and finishes. Those are ways he can get on the court immediately, and then the skill stuff hopefully will come with time.
Sean, maybe this is just me, but I hear a 6'11 guy playing at the 3, and I get a little worried. I think some North Carolina fans probably think about that experiment where Roy Williams put John Henson at the 3. I understand that he and John Henson are not the same. I understand there's not a ton of similarities other than the fact that they're both very rangy, long arm guys. That said, tell me why potentially playing Jarin Stevenson at the 3 may or may not be a good thing.
I'd probably go with probably not a good thing. Could it be a lineup that is used where he is at the 3 in certain situations where you are trying to stretch the floor, or defensively you're going with a tall lineup? Yeah, I think for spot possessions, if he was going to be with Vesar or Wilson, I'd prefer Wilson at the 3, just given a little more agility in that situation. So I think that's where the early games can ideally be used as a little bit of a testing tool to see how he does function and how the team functions and the different lineups. I don't think it's a long-term recipe for success. I think we've seen UNC use it in the past, high school teams, AU teams, NBA teams, and it never really works as well as you might hope when you're thinking of all that size and skill. But once again, it's going to come down to who is with him, because all those guys I mentioned can shoot the three, but you wouldn't, as of right now, they're not dead eye shooters or knockdown shooters. So it provides a lot of size and length, but in terms of if you're facing quick guards, they could probably just attack pretty easily and get guys off balance. So I think it really comes down to situations the teams are facing, trying to get some reps in the preseason. But once again, if you're trying to get those three guys, would probably rather Wilson shift down and keep Stevenson at the four. As we said, Nate Oates talked about it and played him at the three a little bit. But him playing at the three was mostly standing in the corner offensively for catch and shoot. And then defensively, once again, you're going to get put through a lot of ball screens and picks. But I think it's his size and length that can make a difference defensively. But probably not something you want to go to as your lineup of death, as they love to call for the Warriors and other teams.
Sherrell, Hubert Davis said multiple times, and we've mentioned it in just about all of these commitment transfer podcasts, he wanted the team to be bigger. He wanted the roster to get bigger. That was one of his, I guess, probably priority 1 and 2. And then, respective of talent. What is obviously there's growth with him bringing in a 6'11" Jarin Stevenson. What do you feel like his ceiling, or what is Jarin Stevenson's upside? What does a good season for Jarin Stevenson, and also for Jarin Stevenson in North Carolina's roster, look like next season?
The raw talent has always been there with him. I don't think it's really ever been a question about whether or not he was talented enough to, become a starter at the SEC level. I think he started 22 games for Alabama, or become a starter at the ACC level. The question mark has always been like, kind of, how much does he want it? Like, does his motor run high all the time? And that's been a question mark since he was a sophomore in high school, since the first time we watched him. And perhaps that's improved, and perhaps Hubert Davis can continue to get it to improve. And if he does, then I think the ceiling is, as Sean said, just improving that three-point shot, because he would likely be in the corner a lot, and then just being a little more aggressive offensively, especially in the paint, just developing a hook shot, just trying to do a little more with aggression. And if he does that, I don't see why he can't be a fifth starter, depending upon how the roster shakes out, or like a super sub 6-man. We've talked about for years, or not for years, I guess this season, looking at other teams, and it's like their eighth person would be starting for most teams. And so I think it's a chance to stack depth like that, to make your lineup more versatile. So a good season for him. Looks like his three-point percentage goes up a little bit. He's able to knock down some of those shots in the corner. His rebounding percentage goes up. And again, rebounding percentage and rebounds per game are different. Percentage is a better measure, just because it takes into account how often you're on the court. So if his rebound percentage goes up, if his three-point percentage goes up, and he is that fifth guy or that super sub, then I think he's had a tremendous season. And then you start talking about where he to stay in North Carolina for his final year of eligibility. Caleb Wilson likely goes off to the NBA. Then he slots in as a starting four with 2 years of experience in the SEC, a year of experience in the ACC, and he really should be kind of ready to go and ready to reach his full potential. So I think it's kind of a 2-year plan, so to speak, for him. The first year, come in, get yourself acclimated with everything that Hubert Davis wants to do, get used to being back home, accept the role that you're going to have, and be a star in the role. I know that's cliche, but that's what he has to do. And then if he's able to do that, carry that weight into the offseason, and then 2026, 2027 is when it's kind of your time to shine.
So I think, to me, as we talk about skill set and how does he fit, to me, what Sherrell's saying is the biggest positive of this. UNC recruited him hard. We just saw what happened with Ian Jackson. You get 5-star talent from 1 year, had some great games, but you didn't really get the full Ian Jackson experience. Alabama had Jarin Stevenson freshman and sophomore year as he was growing up. So would you rather have Jarin Stevenson the last 2 years or this year or next year where he has some experience? I think UNC is getting him at the right time, and it shows the challenges of recruiting these 5-star players, that there's only so many that can truly be difference makers. And if they're a difference maker, they're going to the NBA after 1 year. If they're not, then they're probably going to transfer. So the fact that you're getting him after the transfer, after 2 years of experience, obviously there's, yes, a lot of room for improvement, but to me, that's the biggest positive is when they're getting him versus when they could have had him last year or 2 years ago.
I think that's important context, Sean. I appreciate you sharing that.
Well,
I've
Joey,
always
let me add to what Sean said. Just look at Jalen Withers, because to me, it's kind of a similar situation. The reason I would say that Jaron Stevenson isn't at Carolina those first 2 years is because they took a commitment from Jalen Withers out of the transfer portal in March or April of 2023, and it was kind of like, well, they got Harrison Ingram, they got Jalen Withers. When is Stevenson going to play? And a big thing for him was that he wanted to play, and so he reclassed, went to Alabama, and played. So I look at it a little bit like him in that, he had some decent numbers at Louisville. He played okay, but I think you would say his best basketball came after he had a couple of years of maturing, of dealing with, and I'm talking about Withers here, of maturing, dealing with an awful season at Louisville. Then he comes over to UNC. He has an okay, first year. He's one of the first people off the bench. He's solid. And then by the end of his senior year, he's a starter, and he's one of the reasons Carolina kind of turned their season around. So I kind of look at Withers' arc kind of how you hope Stevenson's arc will go, in that he did the growing and the legwork, like Sean said, elsewhere, and then Carolina gets kind of the fruit of the labors towards the end of his career.
Well, I'm a fan of fruit salad, so maybe I will be a fan of seeing Jaron Stevenson's uh, matriculation bear fruit as he returns to Chapel Hill. And a wise man once said, and I have no idea who I need to attribute this to, but you can't teach height. There's only a certain amount of 6'11" guys in the world, and North Carolina is getting another one that they are quite familiar with, and he is quite familiar with North Carolina. Jaron Stevenson coming home to Chapel Hill, transferring from Alabama to be a part of North Carolina's roster next season. Sherrell, you have one addition you'd like to make before we get out of here?
Yeah, just on the administrative side, I would say this is really Hubert Davis and his staff, and now that Jim Tanner is there, going back to how they handled recruiting when Hubert Davis first arrived. As we all know, there was another player who was scheduled to be on campus, and who had an opportunity to commit to UNC and take Stevenson off the board essentially, and that player didn't do it, and Stevenson kind of beat them to it, and that's why we're talking today. And that is, I think, a good job. People will see it as maybe a negative, but I think it's a shrewd move, and it's what Hubert Davis did when he first arrived at UNC, all the way back to Seth Trimble, Jaden Bradley, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but Will Shaver and Deontay Green, and Jalen Washington and Isaac Trout. You give those guys the opportunity, and you say, we'll take you, but you only have right of first refusal for so long. So this was another example of that, and it is shrewd, and I think it again shows kind of the year-to-year growth you're looking for from a recruiting perspective for this particular staff.
Again, good context. You guys are closing the show strongly. I appreciate that. As Sherrell said, a name that folks recognize, Jaron Stevenson from Pittsburgh via Seaforth, and now via Tuscaloosa, Alabama, coming back home, transferring back to North Carolina. North Carolina will now potentially just kind of sit back for a little bit. Most of the transfer portal work has been done, and they'll see kind of what happens when the portal closes and the dust settles, what next and what holes they have to fill. But for Sherrell McMillan and Sean Moran, I'm Joey Powell for the Coast to Coast podcast. We appreciate John Siegley producing. Make sure y'all go see Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com on East Franklin Street. If you're in town for any sort of spring sports, give them some love. Go by and see them. Locally owned and operated, big supporters of ours. They're breaking news with new gear all the time, the same way we're breaking news about recruiting and transferring and all that good stuff. Appreciate you guys being here. We'll catch you next time on the Coast to Coast podcast. I'm Joey Powell. Y'all be good.